As Aiden raises his glass to toast his engagement to Celine, the doors of the grand hall swing open, revealing Alma, the young woman he left behind without a second glance. She carries a secret that will shatter his flawless facade, triplets with the same eyes he sees in the mirror every morning. Alma's studio was a modest space, yet full of life. Unfinished canvases lay scattered about, paintbrushes stuck haphazardly in glass jars, and the air was thick with the scent of paint mixed with cheap coffee. It was a chaotic haven of creativity, mirroring her life as a young artist teetering between dreams and reality. And amid this whirlwind stood Aiden, the rising politician who drifted in and out of her life like a fleeting breeze, captivating yet unsettling. He was both her greatest inspiration and her deepest source of pain. The relationship between Alma and Aiden had the intensity of a forbidden secret. He would visit her when the weight of his political world became unbearable, bringing whispered promises and touches that made her believe, if only briefly, that she was more than just a distraction. Yet, a single call or an urgent message would whisk him away, leaving behind an emptiness Alma would fill with frenzied brushstrokes and sleepless nights. Aiden had mastered the art of keeping her close without ever truly committing. Beneath her artistic chaos, Alma lived with a constant fear of abandonment. It wasn't just Aiden, echoes of this fear lingered in every corner of her life. She had learned to fend for herself from a young age, but that cold shiver of loneliness never truly left her. Perhaps that's why she clung to Aiden so tightly, despite knowing deep down that he would never choose to stay. Her heart was stubborn, much like her calloused fingers that refused to stop creating something new. Aiden, on the other hand, seemed to use their relationship as a convenient escape. To him, Alma embodied emotions he preferred to keep buried: passion, doubt, and a kind of desire that threatened his polished exterior. Vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with the weight of his family's and society's expectations. Yet, there was something about Alma's intensity that drew him back, even as he knew she could never fit into the world he inhabited. On her darkest days, Alma questioned whether she was destined to always exist on the edges of someone else's life. But in fleeting moments, she allowed herself to savor the crumbs of attention Aiden threw her way. Their relationship was an equal blend of inspiration and destruction, a dangerous dance between love and self-sabotage. She wanted to believe he saw her as something more, but the solitude of countless nights told a different story. Alma's canvases often reflected the internal conflict she struggled to hide. Bright, vibrant colors clashed with shadowy tones, creating landscapes born from a mind caught between hope and disillusionment. Neighbors often heard loud music blaring from her studio, as though she needed sound to drown out her thoughts. And as she worked, Aiden's face would appear in her paintings, a haunting presence she couldn't bring herself to exorcise. Her small studio, imperfect as it was, offered her a measure of comfort. She had her art, her ideas, and that tiny space she could call her own. It was more than she'd had at other times in her life. Yet, Aiden's shadow loomed over everything, a broken promise, a dream of what could have been but never would be. Though she hated to admit it, her art was as entangled with him as she was. In that little studio, Alma learned to navigate extremes: love and rejection, inspiration and frustration, dreams and harsh reality. Each day was a battle for balance, and every night brought the same haunting questions. Was she enough? Could there ever be a world where she didn't have to beg for scraps of affection? The answer seemed to lie within her own hands, yet she lacked the courage to reach for it. Aiden's call came on an ordinary night, while Alma was working on an abstract painting. His words were few and as cold as the night air. He told her he couldn't continue with this, that she was a burden to his plans. The phone slipped from her grasp, but not before his message was complete. Alma stood there, frozen, as the world seemed to spin in slow motion, time mocking her pain. She had always known he could be cruel, but she never imagined he would dare to be so blunt. In the days that followed, the studio felt larger and emptier. Every corner whispered Aiden's absence. The paint seemed harder to work with, ideas refused to flow, and even the coffee had lost its taste. Alma tried to focus, but everything around her seemed to remind her that she wasn't enough for him. The weight of abandonment hung like a shadow, and the fear of finding no way out left her breath short. Painting was no longer a refuge, it had become a battle. When the first signs of pregnancy appeared, Alma went into denial. It was impossible, she told herself. But the sleepless nights and constant nausea told a different story. When the test confirmed it, she broke into tears, unsure if they were born of fear or a faint glimmer of hope. She felt a chill in her chest, as if the world was giving her an ultimatum: fight or give up. Aiden's words echoed in her mind. She knew she couldn't rely on him. The days blurred into a haze of conflicting emotions. There were moments when Alma placed a hand on her growing belly, trying to convince herself she could do it. But fear would quickly return with force. How could she, a young artist without stability, raise a child, let alone 3? The voices of doubt were loud, but the silence of loneliness was even more deafening. The internal battle seemed endless. And yet, something began to shift. Small sparks of determination emerged in unexpected moments. One day, as Alma stared at a blank canvas, she placed a hand on her belly and felt a faint but undeniable movement. It was real, and as scared as she was, she couldn't ignore that there were lives depending on her. For the first time, Alma glimpsed her own strength, distant but present, like a shadow on the horizon. The weeks that followed were marked by highs and lows. Alma began researching pregnancy and preparing what little she could with her limited resources. But the fear never left her. There were moments when she sat on the studio floor, surrounded by unfinished canvases, crying silently. It was a mourning for everything that could have been and for the challenges she knew she'd face alone. But even then, she didn't give up. Pregnancy brought a new palette of colors to her art. Alma began painting with more emotion, as if each canvas were a letter to the children she hadn't yet met. There was hope in some strokes, but also anger and sadness. It was as if her paintings were the only place where she could express herself without fear of judgment. Aiden no longer appeared in her work. Instead, there were undefined shapes, full of potential. Then, one day, as Alma finished a painting, she felt the first strong kick. It was as if the babies were saying, "We're here." She smiled, a smile she hadn't seen on her own face in weeks, maybe months. It was a small step, but enough to make Alma feel she wasn't entirely alone. There was still so much to face, but that connection to something greater gave her a reason to keep going. Alma's world was changing, and she knew she couldn't hide anymore. This was the moment to make a choice, to let fear defeat her or to face it head-on. The idea of confronting Aiden still felt distant, but something inside her knew the confrontation was inevitable. She just didn't know when or how. For now, she needed to focus on what she could control: survival. The days following the discovery of her pregnancy were dark. Alma woke with the weight of a responsibility far greater than she felt capable of carrying. The triplets weren't just an emotional storm, they were a looming shadow of doubt. The fear of failure grew, and sleepless nights only fed her insecurities. "I can't do this," she whispered to herself as she stared at blank canvases, feeling the loneliness devour every shred of confidence she had. As much as she tried, love for her unborn children still felt abstract. Alma found herself wondering if she even had the right to bring them into a world that felt so uncertain. The thought of facing the challenges alone paralyzed her. She considered giving up, ignoring the pregnancy and moving on, but each subtle movement in her belly reignited a small flame of hope. It was a tug-of-war between reason and heart. The studio, once a sanctuary, began to feel suffocating. The paints felt heavier, the brushes useless. She withdrew from her art, as if she didn't deserve to create beauty while her own life was falling apart. The triplets felt like both a burden and a promise she wasn't sure she could fulfill. 4 days, Alma lived in denial, desperately trying to pretend the pregnancy wasn't real. But ignoring reality didn't erase the signs. Alma's body was changing, and the reminders were constant. Each wave of nausea, every ache in her back, was a message that life was growing within her, whether she was ready or not. The fear of failure was overwhelming, and Aiden's absence made every challenge seem insurmountable. Alma found herself trapped in a cycle of doubt, guilt, and a faint glimmer of something she couldn't yet name. One particularly hard night, Alma finally broke. Sitting on the cold studio floor, surrounded by blank canvases and dried-out paints, she cried harder than she ever had. It wasn't just for Aiden's abandonment, but for the overwhelming sense of powerlessness that consumed her. She felt like she was in a maze with no way out, every path blocked by doors she didn't know how to open. But in that silence, heavy with tears, something shifted. Alma placed her hands on her belly almost instinctively and felt a gentle movement. It was as if the babies were answering, letting her know they were there with her. It was a fleeting moment, but enough to make her pause. For the first time, Alma allowed herself to feel something beyond fear. A timid but powerful connection began to form. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Even so, doubt lingered. Alma didn't see herself as a heroine. She didn't feel strong enough to face what lay ahead. But the thought of giving up felt equally wrong. There was something about the triplets that made her hesitate before letting everything fall apart. She knew she needed to find a way, but courage still seemed like a distant dream. The internal battle raged on. Deep down, Alma knew she was at a turning point. Every decision she made felt loaded with consequences too heavy to bear. She wanted to fight but didn't know how. Every small victory, a movement from the babies, an idea for a new painting, served as a reminder that maybe there was something worth saving. But there was still so much to fear, so much to lose. Victor entered Alma's life like a breath of fresh air in the midst of a storm. He was an old art teacher, one of those rare people who saw beyond the brushstrokes and always seemed to understand what the heart was trying to express. Their reunion was unexpected, but not without purpose. Victor found her at a local market, where Alma wandered aimlessly, searching for something she couldn't define. It didn't take many words for him to realize she was sinking. Inviting her over for a warm cup of tea, Victor did something no one else had done. He listened. He listened as Alma poured out her fears, her sense of abandonment, and the emotions consuming her. There were no judgments, only a quiet and steady presence. In that small gesture of care, Alma found a space to breathe. For the first time in months, she felt seen, not as a helpless young woman but as someone who could still be saved. Victor was a man of simple words, but they carried profound wisdom. He didn't try to solve Alma's problems but planted seeds of reflection instead. "You've always had strength within you, Alma," he said, holding her hand gently. "You just need to stop looking for permission to use it." These words, spoken with the calm of someone who had fought his own battles, stayed with her. It wasn't an instant transformation, but it opened a door. In the days that followed, Victor began helping Alma reconnect with her art. He encouraged her to start painting again, even if it was just a purposeless sketch. "Art doesn't ask for permission to exist," he would say with a disarming smile. Hesitant at first, Alma began taking small steps. Her brushstrokes were timid, but with each line, she felt something within her slowly waking up again. Victor also helped Alma face the reality of her pregnancy. He accompanied her to appointments, helped her make plans, and, most importantly, reminded her that she didn't have to face everything alone. "Being strong doesn't mean carrying everything by yourself," he said one day while sitting beside her during an ultrasound. The sight of the triplets on the screen stirred a mix of fear and wonder in Alma. For the first time, she saw them as more than a burden. They were a miracle. With Victor's encouragement, Alma began creating again. Her canvases came alive with an intensity she didn't know she still possessed. The colors were bolder, the shapes more daring, as if each painting was a reflection of her inner struggles. Victor helped her submit her work to a local art fair, a small step that became a pivotal moment. She sold her first painting in months, a triumph that brought tears of relief and gratitude. Victor's presence was both practical and emotional. He helped Alma see that even in the darkest times, there was light to be found. He didn't shield her from her responsibilities, but he also didn't let her drown in them. Alma began to realize that, while fear and abandonment still haunted her, there was a way to turn those emotions into something constructive. Slowly, it felt like she was relearning how to live. The days with Victor brought a routine Alma didn't know she needed. He would take her on morning walks, encouraging her to breathe in the fresh air and remember that the world continued regardless of her struggles. These simple moments helped ease the weight of her long, difficult nights. His support was quiet but steady, a pillar in a life that had been crumbling. Deep down, Alma knew Victor couldn't solve all her problems. He wasn't a magical solution, but he was a reminder that the impossible wasn't as unattainable as it seemed. Each piece of advice he gave her became a tool she used to rebuild herself, a piece of a puzzle she had to assemble on her own. But for the first time, she didn't feel completely lost. There was a path, and she was beginning to see the first steps. Victor didn't need to say it, but Alma could feel it. He believed in her. That silent faith became the foundation for everything she was starting to build. There was still much to face, but something within Alma was beginning to change. The tears of despair were slowly being replaced by tears of determination. With that shift came the realization that the next step was just the beginning. The decision to start over wasn't easy for Alma, but Victor's support made it a little more bearable. Her first morning back in the studio after weeks of silence was a mix of anxiety and resolve. The brushes were worn, the paints half-dried, but the desire to create burned brighter than her fear of failure. Alma stared at a blank canvas for long minutes, willing herself to ignore the voices of doubt. Then, with a deep breath, she made the first brushstroke, breaking the spell. Each day brought new challenges. The pregnancy wasn't easy, especially with triplets, and her work on the paintings demanded more from her than she expected. There were moments when exhaustion made her pause mid-stroke, but the commitment to the children growing inside her kept her going. Art became a means of survival, both financially and emotionally. Her canvases were more than work, they were a silent scream of resilience. The smell of paint and varnish became a constant presence in Alma's life. Every completed painting was a victory against the inner voices telling her she wasn't capable. Victor helped her organize her work, carried her canvases to fairs, and encouraged her to keep going even when financial returns were slow. "One step at a time," he said, as if it were a mantra. Alma clung to those words like a traveler finding water in a desert. The birth of the triplets came earlier than expected, bringing with it a whirlwind of emotions. Alma felt the weight of each contraction as though the universe itself were testing her. The doctors raced against time, and her tears mingled with sweat. When she finally heard the first cry, followed by the other two, something inside her broke and rebuilt itself simultaneously. It was as though all her fear and feelings of abandonment were momentarily replaced by an overwhelming love. Back at home with the babies, the journey continued. Sleepless nights became a new kind of challenge, the sound of infant cries echoing through her small studio. Alma divided her time between caring for the triplets and working on her canvases. The hours seemed far too short for everything she needed to accomplish, but the sight of 3 tiny faces sleeping side by side was what kept her going. Each day, Alma discovered strength within herself that she never imagined she had. Local art fairs began to bear small fruits. Alma sold a painting here and there, using the money to support her children. The recognition was modest but real. Some customers praised the vibrant colors and the raw emotional intensity of her work. "It's as though each painting tells a story," one client remarked. And indeed, they did, stories of struggle, fear, abandonment, and above all, hope. Victor remained by Alma's side, helping her rebuild her life. He cared for the babies while she painted, offered advice on dealing with clients, and occasionally left small motivational notes in her studio. "You're creating more than paintings, Alma. You're creating a future." Those words touched her in ways she couldn't fully express, but they gave her the strength to keep moving forward, even on the hardest days. Over time, Alma's paintings began to gain more attention. A local gallery expressed interest in showcasing her work, offering her the chance to display a few pieces. It was an opportunity she accepted with a tight chest, fearing she wasn't good enough. But seeing her canvases framed and hanging on the white walls of the gallery filled Alma with a pride she hadn't felt in years. It was proof that her choices, as difficult as they had been, were paying off. Despite the small victories, fear and insecurity continued to visit her often. There were days when Alma doubted everything, her ability to be a mother, her talent as an artist. But in those moments, the memory of Victor's support and the sound of children's laughter in the next room were enough to get her back on track. The struggle was constant, but the reasons to keep going outweighed the reasons to give up. The first months as a single mother of triplets brought challenges Alma had never imagined facing. The constant sound of crying babies seemed to fill every corner of the small studio, drowning out even her own thoughts. Yet, amid diaper changes and improvised feedings, she found small moments of peace. Like when the three finally fell asleep, allowing her a few minutes to pick up a brush and pour all her emotions onto a canvas. Her neighbors, initially indifferent, soon split into two camps: those who sympathized with Alma's struggles and those who knocked on her door to complain about the noise. Alma handled each situation as best she could, with an apologetic smile and a promise that things will get better, then returned inside, carrying the weight of their judgment. Still, she refused to let it completely break her. The strength her children awakened in her was greater than any criticism. Victor became more than an ally. He became an honorary grandfather to the babies. On Alma's hardest days, he showed up with bags of groceries or simply offered to hold one of the triplets while she managed the other two. His constant presence was a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. He also made sure to encourage her to keep painting, saying, "Your children will grow up proud of you. Don't stop now." Despite Victor's unwavering support, there were moments when Alma felt suffocated by her responsibilities. The landlord, always impatient, threatened eviction over late rent payments. The income from her paintings barely covered the essentials, and the constant fear of everything collapsing weighed heavily on her shoulders. She clung to small victories, the baby's smiles, compliments from customers, but the fear of not being enough never fully disappeared. One night, as she tried to soothe one of the triplets who wouldn't stop crying, Alma felt tears streaming down her face. Her sobs echoed through the studio, blending with the baby's wails. At that moment, she felt abandonment more acutely than ever before. It wasn't Aiden's abandonment she felt, but her own. It was as if she had lost a vital part of herself, and the fight to find it again seemed endless. But life had its own way of offering relief. One morning, an unexpected client reached out, commissioning a large painting to decorate a local restaurant. The payment was enough to cover the rent and buy new clothes for the babies. Alma worked tirelessly on the piece, channeling all her pent-up emotions into it. When she finally delivered the painting, she felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was like a ray of sunlight breaking through the storm. The triplets, without knowing it, became Alma's greatest source of strength. Every laugh or curious gaze reminded her she was on the right path, no matter how difficult it was. She began to allow herself small moments of joy, playing with the babies on the floor or taking them on short walks to the park. These brief reprieves were vital in reminding her that, despite everything, there was beauty in the struggle. And in the end, it was all worth it. Still, there was a void Alma didn't know how to fill. Aiden's absence was a mix of relief and longing. Though he had hurt her deeply, the idea of her children growing up without knowing their father gnawed at her. Alma began to wonder if she should seek him out, not for her sake, but for the triplets. The thought came and went, never settling into a definitive answer. She knew that sooner or later, she would have to face him. Months passed as Alma dealt with the fallout of Aiden's abandonment. Raising 3 babies alone was an all-consuming challenge, but it also revealed a strength she hadn't known she possessed. As she endured sleepless nights and endless days filled with diapers and brushes, one thought began to take shape in her mind. Why should Aiden walk away unscathed? Why should he continue living his perfect life while she faced the consequences alone? The anger mixed with her sorrow became fuel for a bold decision. News of Aiden's engagement reached Alma through a gossipy neighbor. The wedding was to be a grand event, uniting 2 powerful families. Hearing this, Alma felt a tightness in her chest, a mix of heartbreak and indignation. He had moved on, building the life he always wanted, while she sacrificed everything for the children he didn't even know existed. The thought of letting him escape responsibility became unbearable. She knew she had to act. Still, the decision to confront Aiden wasn't immediate. Alma deliberated for a long time, questioning whether it was the right thing to do, for the triplets and for herself. Fear visited her often. Fear of being humiliated, fear of not being believed, fear of Aiden denying everything. But over time, these doubts gave way to growing determination. Her children deserved to have their origins acknowledged, and she deserved to close this chapter of her life on her terms. Victor, as always, was a pillar of support during this time. "You're not seeking revenge, Alma. You're seeking justice," he said as he helped her plan every detail of the confrontation. He knew she needed strength to face a potentially hostile situation, but also understood she couldn't carry the weight of it anymore. Alma began preparing herself, mentally and emotionally, for what was to come. Each passing day made the decision feel less like a risk and more like a necessity. On the morning of the event, Alma's studio buzzed with quiet chaos. As she prepared to leave, she juggled the triplets' needs. She bathed each of them, choosing simple yet charming outfits that highlighted their purity and innocence. "You are my strength," she murmured to them as she put on their tiny shoes and adjusted every detail. Alma knew this day wasn't just about her. It was about the 3 little ones who depended on her to fight for them. Before leaving, Alma gathered the triplets in her arms and made a silent promise. They were calm, as if they understood the gravity of the moment. "We'll do this together," she said, feeling the weight of responsibility mingled with an unshakable determination. Leaving the studio felt like crossing an invisible threshold. She knew there was no turning back, and that the consequences of this day could change everything, for better or for worse. On the way to the event, Alma mentally rehearsed what she would say, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She knew she would face judgmental glances and the cold stares of Aiden and Celine, but she was no longer intimidated. With every mile that brought her closer to the venue, her determination grew. She knew this was a battle she needed to fight, not just for herself, but for the 3 little hearts that depended on her. When she finally arrived, Alma took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. The triplets were calm, almost as if sensing the importance of the day. She adjusted their clothes one last time, ensuring everything was in order. With a final look of resolve, Alma stepped into the venue, ready to face Aiden and the world that had always rejected her. The engagement party was a perfect portrait of luxury and sophistication. Every detail seemed meticulously designed to showcase the union of Aiden and Celine's families, an event crafted to impress. Aiden, impeccably dressed, moved through the room with a practiced smile, greeting guests and meeting everyone's expectations. Yet, deep down, he felt an unshakable unease. Something felt out of place, as though a part of him knew this grand moment was built on fragile foundations. The sound of the doors opening cut through the murmur of conversations. Alma entered the room, carrying 2 of the triplets, while the 3rd was in the arms of a friend who had accompanied her. Silence fell over the room like a wave, swallowing the clinking of glasses and soft laughter. All eyes turned to her, but Alma kept her head high, ignoring the weight of the judgment around her. Her gaze locked onto Aiden, whose expression shifted from confident to stunned in a matter of seconds. The triplets, innocent and unaware of the tension, curiously observed the brightly lit room. But what caught everyone's attention was something impossible to ignore. They looked exactly like Aiden. From their piercing eyes to the distinct jawline, the resemblance was undeniable. Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd, growing louder as guests struggled to process what they were seeing. The identity of the 3 little ones was unmistakable, and Alma knew it. Aiden froze as if struck by a blow. He blinked several times, searching for words that wouldn't come. His gaze darted between the triplets and Alma, as though seeking an explanation he already knew to be true. Celine, standing beside him, immediately recognized the resemblance. Her eyes narrowed, her usual composure giving way to a fiery rage. "What is this, Aiden?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the silence, seeking answers he wasn't ready to give. Alma stepped forward, still holding the triplets. Her voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of restrained emotion that made even the skeptics hold their breath. "These are your children, Aiden." The simplicity of her words was devastating. There was no need for long explanations or justifications. The truth was written plainly on the children's faces. It was as if time stood still, the entire room waiting for Aiden's reaction. Celine, livid, wasted no time. "You're pathetic," she spat, pulling off her engagement ring and throwing it to the ground with a sharp clink that echoed through the room. With one last glare of disdain at Aiden, She turned and stormed out, leaving a trail of stunned silence and curious eyes in her wake. Aiden's personal and public fall from grace was now evident to all. He had not only lost control of the situation but also the carefully constructed facade he had maintained for so long. As Celine left, Alma handed the triplets back to her friend and turned to face Aiden one last time. "They deserve to know who you are, even if you don't deserve to be part of their lives," she said, her voice carrying a mix of pain and strength. Without waiting for a response, Alma turned and began walking toward the exit. All eyes followed her, but no one dared to speak. The impact of her presence had left everyone frozen. Aiden remained rooted to the spot, unsure of how to react. The weight of the revelation hit him like an avalanche, bringing with it the guilt of what he had done to Alma and the shame of having ignored a part of himself. He looked around, seeing the curious and judgmental stares of the guests, but the only image he could focus on was Alma walking out the door, and the triplets who were a mirror of himself. As the doors closed behind her, the room slowly began to disperse, guests eager to escape the palpable discomfort. But Aiden stayed where he was, motionless, unable to process what had just happened. The image of the triplets remained burned in his mind. They were his. They were a part of him. And he had neglected them before even knowing they existed. For the first time, he felt the true weight of his choices. Outside, Alma took a deep breath, the cool air brushing against her face. There was a sense of relief but also exhaustion. She knew that moment wouldn't erase the years of pain, but it was a start. She had done what needed to be done, for herself and for her children. Now, she could move forward, while Aiden would finally have to face the consequences of his actions. The days following the engagement were a nightmare for Aiden. Public humiliation was only the beginning. News of Alma's revelations spread quickly, making its way into newspapers and social media. Aiden was no longer the promising politician from an influential family. He was the man who had abandoned the mother of his children and tried to hide them while pursuing a convenient marriage. His reputation, carefully built over the years, crumbled like a house of cards. Celine, of course, wasted no time severing all ties. Her public breakup, dripping with scorn and harsh words, became a hot topic among the social circles they both frequented. To Celine, the marriage had been more than a commitment. It was a transaction of power. And with Aiden's downfall, he became dead weight. His family, embarrassed by the scandal, didn't take long to turn their backs on him. His parents, who had always supported him financially, withdrew their assistance, leaving him entirely on his own. Without Celine, without family support, and with his political career in ruins, Aiden was forced to confront a reality he had never experienced before. For the first time, he had to deal with practical problems, paying bills, finding a place to live, and enduring the disdainful stares of people who once admired him. His downfall was not just financial but deeply emotional. The guilt of abandoning Alma and their children weighed on him constantly. Over time, the matter of the triplets became unavoidable. Alma, now gaining recognition as an artist, did her best to support them, but the costs were overwhelming. Diapers, food, clothes, medical appointments, all of it added up to more than she could manage alone. Aiden received notice from a lawyer, informing him of his legal responsibility to financially support his children. Reading the document was a blow to his ego but also a wake-up call. He had to take action. With no outside help, Aiden began working temporary jobs to earn money. He went from someone who signed checks without glancing at the amount to someone who counted every penny. The jobs were simple, sometimes humiliating, but he accepted them without complaint. Initially, his motivation was solely to fulfill his legal obligation, but as the days passed, something inside him began to change. Helping Alma and the triplets shifted from a duty to an emotional necessity. The first time he handed Alma money was tense. He knew she didn't trust him, and she had every reason not to. Alma greeted him with a look of skepticism and exhaustion. "I'm not asking for anything for myself," she said firmly. "This is for your children. They need stability." Her words struck him deeply. Even in that moment, she was protecting the children, putting them above any personal grievances. Aiden began to go beyond what was required. He sought to understand the triplets' specific needs and helped wherever he could. He bought diapers, toys, and food. He even offered to take the children to medical appointments or help organize their routine when Alma had deadlines for her paintings. He knew these actions wouldn't erase the past, but they were his attempt to build something in the present. Over time, Alma started to notice that Aiden's efforts weren't superficial. He was genuinely trying, albeit awkwardly, to be part of the triplets' lives. Even so, she maintained clear boundaries. "Don't think this changes what happened between us," she told him on one occasion, her voice firm but free of bitterness. Aiden nodded, understanding that her forgiveness, if it ever came, would be a slow process. His priority was clear: to be a father to the children he had once neglected. The triplets, still too young to understand the complexities, quickly adapted to Aiden's presence. He discovered that holding them and hearing their laughter brought him a kind of joy he had never experienced before. These simple, everyday moments became the highlight of his week. Every smile, every wobbly step, felt like proof that he could still get something right. Aiden began visiting the triplets regularly, following a schedule he had suggested himself. Initially, the visits were brief and supervised by Alma, who maintained an emotional distance. She allowed him to spend time with the children but made it clear that his presence depended on consistency. Aiden understood her mistrust. He knew he needed to rebuild trust not with words but with repeated, honest actions. The triplets, though small, quickly recognized Aiden. It was impossible to ignore the resemblance between them and their father. Their curious eyes and tentative smiles stirred a sense of responsibility in Aiden, one that was accompanied by an unfamiliar warmth. He began learning how to care for them, from changing diapers to singing lullabies, even if he sang off-key. Each small success was like a brick in the reconstruction of his life. Alma observed from a distance, not interfering but paying close attention to every gesture. Deep down, she wanted to believe Aiden could be a present father, but the past kept her heart guarded. Aiden, for his part, didn't push. He understood that to earn his place in his children's lives, he had to prove he was willing to put their well-being above everything else. Gradually, the time spent with the triplets began to change him. One ordinary afternoon, as he played with the children, Aiden found himself laughing at something simple, the way one of the boys tried to walk with determined steps while the two girls crawled after him in a makeshift race. It was a light, genuine laugh, the first he could remember in months. In that moment, he realized the triplets were not just a responsibility, they were a blessing. They were his chance to become someone better. As time passed, Aiden became more actively involved in the children's lives. He took one to the doctor while Alma cared for the other two. He brought educational toys and groceries to ease Alma's financial burden, but also small, thoughtful gifts like flowers to brighten the modest apartment where she lived. These gestures, though subtle, showed he was trying to build more than just an occasional presence. The greatest transformation in Aiden occurred during the most ordinary moments. He learned how to prepare bottles, handle crying fits, and even tell bedtime stories. Sitting on the floor beside the cribs, he would make up adventures and characters, and the triplets, with wide, sparkling eyes, would laugh and babble in response. These moments, though simple, were profound. They taught Aiden that being a father was so much more than he had imagined. Meanwhile, Alma began to notice that Aiden was genuinely trying to change. She kept her barriers up, but his dedication was undeniable. He not only showed up but asked questions, wanted to understand the children's needs, and expressed concern for their future. While the pain lingered, Alma started to feel she could trust him with small responsibilities, accepting his help without fear of failure. Over time, Aiden's presence became a natural part of the triplets' lives. They eagerly awaited his knock at the door, greeting him with clumsy hugs and loud laughter. He had become the father he never imagined he could be, and this connection began to fill the void he had carried for so long. For the first time in a long while, Aiden felt he was on the right path, not just for himself but for the children who had now become his priority. Alma and Aiden, though still emotionally distant, began to establish a partnership rooted in mutual respect. Alma maintained firm boundaries but acknowledged Aiden's genuine effort. Together, they discussed plans for the triplets' future, made decisions, and learned to balance their differences for the sake of their children. While their relationship could never return to what it once was, A new foundation was being built, the shared love they had for their kids. Aiden also began to rethink his own life. He realized that the social status he had once held so dear paled in comparison to the joy of his children's laughter or the satisfaction of helping Alma lighten her load. Each moment with the triplets reminded him that his transformation was ongoing. There was still a long road ahead, but now he had something worth fighting for. The triplets were too young to understand the impact they had on Aiden's life, but to him, they were everything. Every step, every smile, every small accomplishment of theirs was a victory for him as well. They taught him the importance of being present, of being patient, and of cherishing the simplest moments. Holding their small hands in his, he felt something he never had before: pride. Time brought Alma and Aiden something that had seemed impossible in the months following their confrontation: balance. It wasn't a quick or easy process, but little by little, they learned to coexist. Alma remained focused on her artistic career, which was gaining increasing recognition. Her emotionally charged paintings began drawing attention from larger galleries, allowing her to finally achieve the stability she had always dreamed of. Yet, amidst her professional growth, her triplets remained the center of her life. Aiden, on the other hand, built a solid relationship with his children. He didn't just contribute financially, he made it a priority to be present for every milestone. From their first words to their wobbly first steps, Aiden was there, learning to be a father as the triplets grew. Alma acknowledged his efforts and, though emotional distance remained, she could see he had changed, not as a partner for her, but as a father for their children. The triplets, now older, became the glue that held Alma and Aiden together. They were at the heart of an unlikely but functional partnership. Discussions about education, joint decisions on medical care, and shared moments like birthdays or school events became routine. Aiden and Alma learned to communicate without letting the ghosts of the past interfere with the present. They would never be close friends, but there was respect, and that was enough. For Alma, the most important thing was seeing her children happy. Their laughter filled the house, and she knew part of that joy came from Aiden's efforts to be present. She still maintained clear boundaries. Her heart had closed to him for good. But that didn't mean she couldn't acknowledge his transformation. She allowed herself to accept his help, not as a favor but as the triplets' right to have an involved father. Aiden, in turn, found something he had never expected: a purpose. He let go of empty ambitions and embraced a simpler but more meaningful life. He discovered that being a good father was far more valuable than any political office or social recognition. His new life lacked the superficial sparkle of his past but held something far deeper: authenticity. And though he still felt remorse for what he had put Alma through, he was learning to live in the present and build something worthy for the future. Alma's studio, once a place of chaos and uncertainty, became a space of creativity and lightness. The triplets played there while she painted, filling the room with laughter and color. When Aiden came to pick them up, he would often linger for a few moments, watching in admiration at what Alma had built. He knew he could never undo the past, but he felt proud of the woman she had become, a strong, independent woman who never stopped fighting for their children. Though their paths were now separate, there was a quiet understanding between them. Alma and Aiden went their own ways but shared the same goal: to ensure the triplets grew up surrounded by love and stability. They didn't need to be together to fulfill that mission. There was peace in the balance they had found, and for both of them, that was enough. The triplets were the greatest reflection of their journey. They carried the best parts of both parents and, without knowing it, had been the catalyst for the transformation of two very different people. For Alma, they were proof of her resilience. For Aiden, they were proof of his redemption. And for both of them, the triplets were the bond that would unite them forever, even as they walked separate roads. On that late afternoon, as Alma finished another painting and Aiden played with the triplets in the yard, there was a sense of completeness in the air. Their story, full of mistakes, losses, and lessons, had finally reached a place of balance. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real. And for both of them, that was more than enough.